To talk about it a little more with you, yeah.
So I'm going to start us off by inviting you to say your name and where are you arriving from today, and also where's home for you.
Okay. So my name is Jahari.
Hi, Jahari.
Ortega. I born and raised here in Boston. And more specifically today, I'm coming from dance class.
All right. Where do you dance, and what type of ways do you move your body?
Yeah, so I grew up dancing, and most recently I started dancing bomba.
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is, because I'm Jamaican and it really reminds me of our folkloric dances. But I have friends who are really, really deep in their practice with bomba, and it's just so liberating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's exciting to hear. Yeah. Have you been dancing it a long time, or?
No, I just started. I've been dancing bomba for only a few months.
Where are you doing bomba?
I'm doing bomba at I'm trying to remember the name, Spontaneous Celebrations
in JP
yes. With bomba.
Okay, yeah. I've heard that. I've heard about them. A few folks have gone to the classes, so I need to check it out because is it with live drumming or?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay.
So as you know, you can go and you can learn the different instruments. You can learn the movements as well.
Oh wow! So it's not just the movement; it is like the whole experience. I love that. I may really have to follow up with you on that.
Yes, absolutely.
That's exciting. And so thank you again for being here, for coming in. I'm Stefanie Belnavis. I am a lot of things, but in this space, I am a photographer. I am a creative at heart. I'm a granddaughter, a daughter, a sister, all these things. And you've walked into In Ernest, which is really a love letter to my grandpa. He passed away in 2010. And he and my grandmother were like really, really, they're anchors for our family. And being the youngest of the grandkids in my family, like I didn't really have a lot of visual representation. I remember the experiences we had together, but there wasn't a lot of photographs. And a few years ago, in trying to discover my own birth story, I discovered that my aunt and my family collectively have these heirlooms, these artifacts that are connected to my grandfather. And so it's been interesting to discover them and be able to explore and actually see his handwriting, see the connection, the visual connections to the different islands that my family, lived in and explored. And he was a pastor with my grandmother. And so to see that he had a balance of his life as a pastor, his life as a husband, but also exploring the world and documenting the world with his Leica camera. And that from a very young age got me into this notion of portraiture and the importance of it, especially to preserve memory. So for someone who doesn't have a lot of photos of my childhood, I do have a lot of visual representation through stories. And then again, getting access to his collection, I was like, oh my God, there we are. So thank you again for coming into this space. And in this particular space, you're in the people's living room. So I want to welcome you.
Thank you.
And we have some questions here that you can feel free to talk about what you wrote or if something else comes to mind. But I want to first invite you to share a memory or story of your grandparents or grandparent that you hold close to your heart.
So much. I feel like I get flooded with memories and emotions with that question. Well, one, I have been blessed to have met both of my great-grandmothers on both sides, so 4 generations on both sides. And that was an amazing experience. They've both since passed, but one of them I lived with for a short period of time. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and occasionally she would think that I was my grandmother. And as a toddler, as a baby, you don't really understand all of that. I just knew I had a really close connection with her. And then my mom's grandmother lived in North Carolina, and I grew up here in Boston, but every summer I would go down to North Carolina and spend it with her in the middle of nowhere on a farm. And, just chilling and, having 2 different kind of environments and things like that. And you sharing a little bit, my grandfather recently had passed this past February. And I feel, definitely like this experience, this conversation and your work aligning with I mean, the timing is amazing in terms of the process and remembering him and the stories he told. We spent a lot of time together.
Yes.
I grew up in his home, multi-generational family. And here in Boston, I think one of our strongest memories, we always, growing up, walked around the Jamaica Pond together. It was like our thing. And when he had moved, we got like watches that tracked our steps so that we could still kind of keep that competitive spirit of walking and things like that. So yeah.
Do you mind saying their names if you know them?
Yes. So my grandfather is Abelardo. My grandmother on my dad's side, my great-grandmother on my dad's side is Obdulia. And then my great-grandmother on my mom's side was Bernice.
Thank you. Because I often, sometimes we have these memories, but we don't actually say their names or talk about some of the experiences. So thank you for being so open and like actually calling them into the space in this way. Let me ask you, growing up, the living room was a place where fill in the blanks.
Everything happened. I remember my grandmother Janice, my mom's mom, coming to Boston from North Carolina. Every single time she came, it was a fashion show. I pulled everything out of my closet, tried on all the different outfits, had music playing in the background. That's one of my favorite memories. I was talking about it to her recently and was like, I might bring that back. Homework and random Tuesdays that become, extended family and friends, and all of a sudden the neighbor thinks it's somebody's birthday, but it's not. Just storytelling and sitting on the floor, eating. And
I resonate so much with that. That's why I have the record player over there, because we didn't grow up with, like I said this at the opening, I didn't grow up with like an alarm. It was my dad would come and if we're getting ready for school on a school day, he would come and knock on me and my sister's door, my other sister's door, and then he would just turn on the radio and it would go from like news to like whatever genre of music, and that was like, okay, wake up. And then there was always a radio on until like about 10 o'clock at night, right? So that became like the soundtrack a little bit to our lives. And the kitchen was right beside the living room. So even if the TV's on 100, the radio is on as well in that way. So thank you for sharing. I'll ask you one more question if that's okay. No, two more. Who are the storytellers or oral historians in your family or in your life?
I definitely think my grandmother Janice, my mom's mom. You ask her one question and you get a 5-page essay, which I love. My grandmother on my dad's side, Yvonne, she's a bit quieter, but her and I have a really nice relationship. I've always asked a lot of questions ever since I was little. And that being said, I am starting to consider myself one of the storytellers in the family, because I've been the only one in my generation to really like ask so many questions and learn the recipes and learn about traditions and religions that like religious practices that we don't necessarily see anymore in the family, but I know of. It kind of is a little bit of a responsibility, it feels like now, to continue those practices and keep them going. So
awesome. And I'm going to invite you really quickly to dream with me a little bit, right? Okay. We're sitting in this notion of the people's living room, which is an accessible space for people to come, reminisce. If you could envision the people's living room, what would it look like, smell like, sound like? Who would be in it, for example?
I mean, I definitely imagine music playing. In terms of smell and sound, I feel like the words the word that's coming to mind is like a buzz, you know, a buzz of energy where, you know, there's music, but there's also kind of some chatter and conversation constantly happening, maybe some snacking happening. In terms of people, I think people of all ages, you know, I feel like that multi-generational space conversation is really important.
Thank you. And we're here at Artifacts and Heirlooms. It's a workshop where we're going to get started shortly, but did you bring any, or can you think of any artifacts or heirlooms that really kind of represents maybe like your grandparents or great-grandparents, or even just your family?
I trained as a jeweler, and before he passed, he had asked me to repair his ring. And so I still have it.
Wow.
And I feel like, you know, him trusting me to fix it is him trusting me to hold it. And so I brought that with me today.
Thank you so much. So nice to meet you, Harry. Thank you for joining us in the People's Living Room. I invite you to continue to explore. Hopefully we're going to get started soon, but thank you for letting me just sit with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So nice to meet you.
You as well. And you can